Welcome to Through the Word, leading you on a journey through the entire Bible, one chapter at a time. Today, Chris Langham guides us through the Old Testament book of Genesis. Now to Pastor Chris.
Today on Through the Word, we're going back, all the way back to the beginning, the book of Genesis today, and we start with an introduction to the book. The word Genesis means beginning or origin, and the title is taken from the very first phrase in the book, in the beginning. Now, I think Genesis is fascinating. I'm always intrigued by the backstory, the story that explains how things got to be the way they are. There was a trend a few years ago in the world of superhero movies to go back to the beginning of the story. Batman, Superman, X-Men, each of them took us back to where the story started. Now, those stories are compelling because so many things make sense when you go back to the start. Although I'm still waiting for the Origins movie on Hong Kong Phooey. But think about this. What if someone made your beginnings movie? The story of your formation. What if you could see your own backstory, back when it started, the experiences, the words, the hurts, and the heroes that formed your thinking? I'll bet it would explain a lot about you today. And what if you got your parents' story? Surely their story is part of who you are. And then further still, to trace back the roots of your family tree, the people, the stories, and with them the reasons that led up to you and who you are. That's what Genesis does. It goes back to the start, to the roots of life, and of what it means to be human, and it explains a lot. As you read through Genesis, you'll find yourself saying, wow, that explains a lot about why life is the way it is, and why I am the way I am. These are our ancestors, quite literally. Genesis is the book of beginnings. It's the origin story for all of creation, from the smallest atom to the furthest star, and to you and me. In verse 1 of chapter 1, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." There it is, the start of it all except for God, of course. God was already there. God, who has no beginning and no end, is the one who created everything. And in case you're wondering, I believe that he made it exactly as it is recorded here in Genesis, not only because it's in the Bible, but also because the biblical account is, from all my studies, the most scientifically sound explanation of life as we know it. Now, you're free to disagree with me, of course, but if you're going to listen to me, it's only fair that you should know where I'm coming from. You should always find out your teacher's point of view, whether or not you agree. So why do I believe that the Bible account is true? Well, a lot of reasons from a lot of study. I am a scientist, though not a biologist. I studied engineering. I studied how structures and machines are designed and made. So I don't know every detail of every argument on the origin of life. But like most of you, I can make conclusions from what I've studied and observed. This much I do know. The simplest living organism has more moving parts than the most complex machine that man has ever made. Over 100,000 moving parts in a single cell, working thousands of operations every second. The intricate workings of the simplest living machine are mind-boggling, and the design only gets exponentially more complex from there. As an engineer, as someone who designs things, I stand in awe of life. And I honestly believe that it's an insult to the designer to say that a machine like that was an accident. More than that, I think it's an absurdity, truly. As for the Bible, it is not meant to be a science book, and it does not answer every scientific question. But I have become convinced by much compelling evidence that the Bible is scientifically and historically accurate. Now, I'll not take the time here to argue the case. I hope to record a topical series on the Bible and science sometime soon. If you want to dig in to make your own conclusions, and I hope you do, we have links to some good websites at throughtheword.org. Just look for the info tab and the link to more resources. Now, back in Genesis, the creation story moves forward quickly. All of creation is covered in one chapter. Then chapter 2 zooms in on the creation of mankind, and is the story of humanity that is the real focus of Genesis. Humans and their relationship with their Creator. That relationship starts in harmony, but is severed badly in chapter 3. Sin enters the picture, and death follows closely behind. From there, we follow man's story on a downward spiral. Family is another major theme in Genesis, and sibling rivalry turns to jealousy, lies, murder, and most pointedly, separation from God. Apart from God, man goes from bad to worse, and judgment becomes the next major player in the story. The story of Noah and the flood is a rough one, and in the text of that story, we see the heart of our Creator more closely, a God of both mercy and justice, a God who is brokenhearted over the world that he made, and a God who works hard to save his creation. One more thing to watch for as you read, and this may be the most important. Through all of the sin and forgiveness, judgment and salvation, God is working to recreate a relationship with man, with a few individuals who choose to walk with him. More specifically, God makes a covenant. That word covenant is the lifeline of this story. A covenant is a binding agreement between two separate beings that brings them into a relationship together, like a marriage. Covenant creates terms that connect us, that allow us to walk together. As you read Genesis, watch for the word covenant. It is God's great plan to create relationship with mankind, with you and with me. God enters into covenant with a chosen few, and their stories are set apart from the rest. Many humans have walked the landscape of this earth, but only a few have walked with God. Now, the Bible is not a complete and comprehensive history of every people group, but it is for all peoples. That is made clear from the very first promises given to one man in chapter 12, when God made a covenant with a man named Abram, before his name changed to Abraham. And change is at the heart of this man's story. Abram did not inherit a heritage of godliness. Abram chose a new walk, a walk of faith. That's another major theme to watch for here, faith. The stories of Abram and his descendants here in Genesis are not all clean and pretty. Their faith walk is a messy one, full of lies and dirt and blood and all the complex messiness that we call life. But there's one more thing they're full of, redemption. Redemption is taking something wrecked and ruined and restoring it to life again, turning desperation to hope and worthless vanity to eternal glory. Redemption is the one great change that God weaves through every story in the Bible. And through Abram, God made a plan to bring a redeemer for everyone. Not Abraham himself, but one of his branches, way down the family tree. So Genesis is the backstory for all of creation and for the redemption of the whole world. And that reminds me of a story of my own. Some years ago, I decided to ask my dad for his backstory. We were close enough when I was young, but he had never told me how he became the man that I knew. So he did. He started with his dad's story, and once a week I would call, and he would pick up where he left off. We made it all the way to the late 1960s, just a few years before I was born. Then before I could call again, my father had a stroke, and I never heard him speak a word again. He was mute. My father died several months later, one of the countless aftershocks of the Genesis 3 story. But even the hard days of my dad's muteness were redeemed by God. Ask me and I'll tell you the story sometime. And I am so thankful that I asked my dad for his story, part of my story, part of who I am. And that is how I read Genesis. It is our story, a part of who we are. And like my dad, we'll pick up where we left off on our next study, which is, of course, chapter 1, in the beginning.
Join us next time on Through the Word as we continue the journey, one chapter at a time. Start your own journey through the Bible with our web and mobile apps at throughtheword.org. Our apps are free and free to share, so tell your friends and take the journey together. If you'd like to help us reach more listeners, you can donate, share the app, order flyers, or pray for us, all at throughtheword.org or at facebook.com/throughtheword. Chris Langham is the founder of Through the Word Ministries in Huntington Beach, California. You can find information and links for all our teachers on the website. And remember, faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the Word.